Hello and welcome to AQA GCSE Sociology. This video is part of our series on what should I do if I get a question on socialisation. Now, socialisation, if you notice from the definition, this is spelled the American way, so Z instead of S. It's irrelevant spelling really here, but it's defined either as the activity of mixing socially with others, which is a process, or the more sociological idea of learning to behave in a way which is acceptable to society. So here you can interchange terms such as norms and values to be more specific. What socialisation really is how we learn behaviour. So a lot of the questions you get, you will refer back to socialisation, and it's a really useful concept for you to link and to get marks. So socialisation can be primary or secondary, coming from parents or from outside influences. And the big debate here, you may notice the picture of the feral child versus the toddlers playing, is what effect does socialisation have? How much is nature involved in our behaviour and what we do, and how much is nurture? So that debate of nature versus nurture, one of the very first things you should learn in sociology, is something you can always refer back to here. If you get a question on research methods in socialisation, so a 4-marker, really you need to think about why would a sociologist want to research socialisation. And that would be to measure behaviour. That would be to measure whether a behaviour is normal or not, whether it follows the norms and values of a society, and what effect that has on society over time, perhaps. So often you might link that to crime as a really good example, how some things are criminal at certain societies, certain points in time, and the changes that brings. It's applicable throughout all of the course, really. But when we're looking at research methods, how do we link socialisation to studies? Well, functions will be looking for patterns of social cohesion or patterns of deviance and what that tells us about a society. Feminists will be looking at inequalities in gender or norms and values around gender, whereas Marxists would be class and identity and those inequalities. So they may be researching against secondary data. They may be using comparisons of official statistics to look for inequalities or patterns. They may be conducting surveys to get qualitative data, or equally qualitative data, people's thoughts and opinions. So socialisation, if you get a question where you get this in research methods, really it's thinking about what patterns and behaviours and changes over time are linked to that. That would really be the aim of a sociologist, most likely. Families and socialisation. This would be where primary socialisation comes in. Essentially, what we're taught by our parents and our siblings is considered primary socialisation. So if you think about functionalism and the functions of the family, that would all link very nicely to primary socialisation. And this is the idea that we learn from our parents. And there's big debates about how families are then agencies of socialisation. Do dads teach sons to be men? Do mothers teach daughters to be women? That's a very simplistic way, and what most people, the general public, may understand. But obviously, that's not entirely the whole picture, and that's not entirely true. You know, it's quite possible for a woman to teach her son how to be a man, and vice versa. What we're really looking at is differences in family type and what that means for socialisation. So obviously, there's this notion that the nuclear family is the best, the most normal, because there's the balance there of male and female when it comes to socialisation, when it comes to teaching kids. And then there's this idea of canalisation, about what toys, what clothes, what ways of behaviour we accept from different genders. As they grow up and as they in their formative years, does that shape society because it shapes the individual? So what Durkheim would call the transmission of norms and values, maybe. Therefore, if you've got a question like this one, discuss how far sociologists would agree that families remain an important agency of socialisation. Notice it's in Britain today. So therefore you can talk about change over time to show really good understanding. You can go back to, say, Marx's time in the Industrial Revolution, the 1950s, and the formation of teenage culture and things like that. You can do that, and you can talk about how there's been wider changes in society which reflect how parents interact with their children, the idea of child-centeredness, for example, and that can link to lots of different issues. So if you look at all of our other videos and other modules, you'll see, you know, different classes maybe have different emphasis on how they raise their children, or different ways of raising their children, different ethnicities and different family types that go with it. And this then impacts on gender, this then impacts on identity, this impacts on everything else, class. So then you can talk about functionalist, feminist, Marxist as is relevant. So really this question is really, really simple and straightforward because it gives you lots of freedom if you can use socialization as a way to link lots of different topics and ideas. Education, crime and deviance and socialization. Again, all of the issues that we've talked about can come back to this module and this topic. So you could explain crime or deviance as inadequate socialization. People choose to act out of norms and out of the regular way of behaving or speaking or appearing or whatever it may be because they're not socialized properly, whatever that may mean. So they may join a subculture because they feel they don't fit in with normal society. And that makes really good discussion and really good debate. And then attitudes around crime and deviance. It may be that primary socialization means crime is inherited. If your parents are involved in criminal behaviour or you grow up around criminal behaviour, are you more likely because you accept it and see it as normal to be a criminal? Or is it because you're more likely to live in poverty or circumstances where crime is necessary? Now obviously that would depend on functionalist and Marxist perspectives how you answer that question. But if you look at, say, this essay question from a previous paper about gender socialization and whether women commit less crime than men, that's a really fascinating question because you can link all of the other modules, family and education, social stratification, class, gender, type, all the different identities, how people are taught who they are and why they might turn to crime. So you may say things around it's possible to be socialized into crime, or it's more likely that people say, so Heidegger would argue crime is a necessary rational choice because of class and gender. So you can make lots of comparisons here, and you can talk about how there's other factors, other processes outside of socialization, and that would be a really good way to answer the question. Use the gender socialization as an anchor throughout, if you like, to keep referring back to. Generally speaking, when it comes to crime and deviance, obviously socialization and this idea of crime allowing a value consensus from functionalism is really useful. So bear that in mind, bring that into any question you have on crime and deviance. Social stratification and socialization are probably the most intuitive comparisons, really. So can we be socialized into our position in society is a huge question. Marxists would say this is very much true, and you see it throughout the whole GCSE. School is organized in a way to keep people in their place. Families have their own sort of working class culture, middle class culture, upper class culture, which teaches kids to stay in their place and kind of reject social mobility. So there's that whole debate around whether social mobility is possible because of that, and this is linked to our identity. A lot of people may see themselves as one thing or another, but the rest of society won't. So a lot of people may say that they are working class or middle class, whereas society would judge them as not to be for a variety of factors. So this is where socialization can allow you to compare things. And if you look at this previous question, social class rather than gender or ethnicity is the most important division in British society. That allows you to talk about all three things, and you can refer to socialization as how do people identify themselves, how do they view the world and view themselves. And you can talk about that from class, gender, ethnicity as a comparison and make a decision. Is one more important than the others? Well, does that depend on your perspective? Obviously, feminists would say gender, Marxists may say social class, and both may link ethnicity to giving an even greater inequality there. So socialization would come into that depending on how people grow up and how they're brought up and how they view themselves and interact with society because of that. So you have lots of depth there and lots of comparisons. What you may notice throughout the whole of this is whatever the topic, if you get a question that links to socialization, you can use that to bring in wider knowledge to really show off to the examiner. And that's why it's so good. If you get a question around socialization or identity, you can intertwine the two, you can bring out lots here and really excel. I hope that's answered any questions you may have on using socialization in the exam. If you do have any questions that I haven't covered, please feel free to comment, to send me a question on the classroom, to email me. Anything that you need, I'll try and get back to you. Thank you very much.